Greetings, fellow netizens. I'm Bill. Today I'm speaking about Sola Scriptura, related concepts, and what I would affirm therein. There are two primary ideas asserted by Sola Scriptura and affirmed by all adherents therein. The first is that the sacred scriptures are the superior foundation of Christian authority, over and against any other source of authority within the Christian religion. And the second is that there is a particular charism of infallibility and or inerrancy, oftentimes both, to the sacred scriptures that is unique therein. A common misconception about Sola Scriptura is that it categorically rejects any authority, binding or otherwise, that is not the Bible in and of itself. The idea that the Bible is to be used as a rule of faith to the overt exclusion of all other authorities or rules of faith is called Nuda Scriptura, a subset of Sola Scriptura. Now, this is mainly affirmed only by fundamentalist Plymouth Brethren and maybe some more sectarian revivalist evangelicals. One can affirm the tenets of Sola Scriptura previously outlined while also affirming that there are other authorities such as sacred tradition, the consensus of church officers, and that these are authoritative and binding on the conscience of the faithful. You can acknowledge that on one hand while also acknowledging that these other lesser authorities do not have infallibility, that they are still fallible. Such who would adhere to what I just stated are the Lutherans, the Reformed, uh, Pietists, and maybe some Baptists as well. Another common misconception is that Sola Scriptura and biblical infallibility are one and the same. They are not. There's a difference, okay? See, Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Oriental Orthodoxy, and the Assyrian churches of the East, they all categorically reject Sola Scriptura, full stop. But they all affirm the infallibility and inerrancy of the sacred scriptures. Where they diverge from Protestantism is the addition of ecumenical councils, liturgical practices, the established consensus of the respective episcopates to the charism of infallibility and inerrancy alongside sacred scriptures. It's worth noting that some within Orthodoxy would see the sacred scriptures as just a subset of sacred tradition, alongside all the other aforementioned artifacts of religion, rather than being something of a separate taxonomy, the same way you see with Western Christianity. Now, side note, Roman Catholicism does this writ large, no pun intended, with the scriptures, and also with their episcopate. They call their episcopate and the established consensus therein the magisterium. Now, this is where you get the analogy of a three-legged stool of sacred scriptures, tradition, and the magisterium as all kind of a three-way equal authority within the Roman Catholic Church. Now, there is an idea related to Sola Scriptura called Prima Scriptura. It affirms the Bible as the superior foundational authority of Christian doctrine and practice, just like Sola Scriptura. But there are two main differences. Number one, Prima Scriptura preconditions supplemental external authorities such as church tradition, consensus of church officers, and reason, experience, whatever like that, to be binding on its adherents. Now, what particularly they will identify as an external authority that's binding will vary depending on whatever tradition you're in. Now, while some adherents to Sola Scriptura may affirm any combination of the aforementioned external authorities, Sola Scriptura does not in and of itself precondition them the same way that Prima Scriptura does. It's worth reminding the viewer that in both dynamics, the supplemental authorities are still mediated through the sacred scriptures, and thus the primacy of scripture is held just as strongly by Prima Scriptura adherents as it is by Sola Scriptura adherents. Also, Prima Scriptura, in all fairness, when you take it to one extreme, makes an ontological preconditioning, basically makes room for infallible or inerrant authorities that are found outside the sacred scriptures, like Orthodox Christians, Assyrian Christians, and Roman Catholic Christians. The main difference in this case is that these outside infallible authorities are still mediated and subordinate to sacred scriptures, unlike in Roman Catholicism, where you see the three-legged stool, their analogy for the three equal authorities. On the other extreme of the ontological preconditioning, prima scriptura can contest the infallibility and inerrancy of sacred scriptures while still upholding its authority. So, yes, you can affirm the authority of scripture without affirming the infallibility or the inerrancy. Now, most adherents of prima scriptura would not fall onto either extremes of those. I'm willing to bet that pretty much almost every adherent of prima scriptura, at least as far as I know, would affirm both the infallibility and inerrancy of Scripture. Now, while this does allow for other authorities to carry those particular charisms, most adherents of prima scriptura would still reserve those particular charisms of infallibility and inerrancy to sacred scriptures. Adherents therein are Methodists, Anglicans, and to a lesser extent Pentecostals. I actively and positively, overtly identify myself as an adherent of prima scriptura. I thus believe that there are authorities that Christians are bound to other than the Bible, binding to your conscience in the same way that the Bible is binding to your conscience, while also acknowledging that these other supplemental authorities are themselves bound to sacred scripture, particularly sacred tradition, the consensus of whatever ecclesiastical structure you fall under, and reason. I believe that they can be, in and of themselves, like I've said, binding on the conscience of the faithful, while also acknowledging that they are to be mediated by sacred scripture. I'm quick also to affirm the infallibility and inerrancy of scripture, as well as the authority of the Bible. But I also realize that, and I think this next part is worth saying, Christian authority is not preconditioned on inerrancy or infallibility, even if we clearly acknowledge that the superior authority of Christendom, that being the sacred scriptures, is rightly attributed to the charisms of infallibility and inerrancy. Have a good day now.